Kieran Blackwood came home that day with the traitor's blood still dried on his shirt cuffs. A brutal day in the underworld. A long interrogation. The traitor had confessed everything before his breathing finally stopped. He was exhausted, not from the work, but from having to return to the house that had died with his wife 10 months earlier. He pushed open the mansion's door, ready to sink into the silence that had swallowed this place for 10 months straight. The silence was so heavy he could hear his own heartbeat. But then he heard it. Laughter. His children's laughter. Kieran's heart seemed to stop. Connor, Finn, and Molly hadn't laughed since their mother had been shot dead on the street. Not once. 10 months had passed, and this house had held only sobbing in the night, the small voices asking when Mom was coming home, and the choking quiet trapped between these walls. He stood frozen in the entry hall, chasing that sound the way a man chases an echo from the dead. The most notorious mafia boss in Chicago, the man who made the entire underworld tremble, was trembling because of his own children's laughter. When he opened the playroom door, what he saw shattered him completely. Eliza Monroe, the nanny his mother-in-law had hired a month earlier, was lying face down on the floor. His 3 children sat on her back. Molly, the youngest, held a pink ribbon looped around Eliza's neck like reins. Eliza was neighing like a horse, shaking her head, laughing with the children, as if she'd forgotten the outside world even existed. And Connor, his oldest, the boy who hadn't spoken a single word in 10 months, was laughing so hard tears ran down his face. Kieran couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. Just hours earlier, he'd decided the traitor's fate in a voice cold as ice. Just hours earlier, he'd been the monster all of Chicago feared. But now he stood pinned to the doorway, helpless as a child. His children, the children who woke up screaming every night, the children who flinched whenever he came near, the children who looked at him with unfamiliar eyes as if he were a stranger, were playing, truly playing. And not with him, not with the most powerful father in Chicago, but with her, a woman he'd barely even looked at. She'd done what he couldn't, what all his money, power, and violence couldn't reach. She'd brought them back from the dead. The fatigue from the whole day dissolved, giving way to something else. A relief so sharp it hurt. A bitter shame. A gratitude so painful his chest felt like it might collapse. Then Eliza lifted her head. Her gaze met his. The laughter died instantly. Fear flickered across her face. Her eyes dropped to his cuffs, where the blood had dried into a dark brown stain. She went still. The children fell silent. They slid off her back and pressed close to her, as if protecting something fragile, as if she needed shielding. From their own father. Kieran stood in the doorway. He couldn't speak. His throat locked tight. His vision blurred. He, the man who never cried, not even when he held his wife's body in the rain, was on the verge of tears because of his children's laughter. Eliza opened her mouth, but no words came. She looked at him, at the blood, then back at him. No judgment, no retreat, only waiting. Kieran knew he should say something. He should explain the blood on his shirt. He should thank her for doing what he couldn't. He should tell her what he was feeling, but he couldn't. Language had abandoned him. He only stood there, staring at the woman who had given his children their laughter back, the woman who was seeing proof of the monster he truly was, and still didn't run. Finally, Kieran gave a small nod. Just one nod, like a wordless thank you, like permission to feel grateful. Then he turned away before the tears could fall. He walked quickly down the hallway and leaned his back against the cold wall. Eyes squeezed shut, his chest flooded with something he'd thought had died with Catherine. He didn't understand what had just happened. He didn't know if it was even allowed to be that grateful to someone who was supposed to be only hired help, someone who had seen blood on his cuffs and hadn't screamed in horror. But one thing was clear. For the first time since Catherine was gone, his children had laughed. For the first time in 10 months, this house held the sound of life. And maybe fate had sent Eliza Monroe for a reason. Sometimes life places someone in our path at the exact moment we need them most. Not by accident, not by coincidence, but by destiny. That night, silence was Kieran's only companion. He sat in his private office, the third glass of whiskey untouched, as moonlight drew faint streaks across the floor. The image of Eliza on the floor, his children's laughter echoing like a bell, kept looping in his mind. Most of all, he saw her eyes the way she looked at the blood on his cuffs and didn't flinch. Why hadn't she run? To find the answer, he finally opened the file he had ignored for a month. If this story touched your heart, please hit like to support the channel. Share the video with the people you love, because sometimes a story can change the way we see life. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, so you won't miss the next moving stories. Kieran reached out, opened a drawer, and pulled out the file his mother-in-law had sent a month earlier. He'd never read it. When Maggie had called to say she'd found a new nanny, he'd only nodded and moved on. The 6th nanny in 10 months. He hadn't had any hope left. But tonight, he needed to know who she was. Eliza Monroe, 27 years old, former pediatric nurse at Chicago Children's Hospital, Quit abruptly 2 years earlier. No reason listed. Current address. A shabby apartment on the south side. The kind of place decent people didn't dare step into after dark. No next of kin for emergencies. No family photos. Her file was empty, as if her life hadn't existed before she walked into this house. But there was one handwritten line at the bottom of the page, slanted letters, slightly trembling, as if the person writing them had been trying to hold something back. I understand loss. I won't run from it. Kieran read the sentence again and again. I understand loss. What did she understand? What had she lost that she could write words like that? That she could look at blood on the sleeve of a strange man and not scream in terror? He leaned back in his chair, eyes squeezed shut, and the darkness dragged him back to the night 10 months earlier. That night, the rain came down in sheets. Molly had a high fever and wouldn't stop crying. Catherine said she'd run to the pharmacy near the house, just 10 minutes. Kieran had been in a meeting with his capos about a shipment at the docks, and he'd only nodded without looking up. He hadn't said, I love you. He hadn't said, be careful. He'd only nodded. 20 minutes later, his phone buzzed. Declan's voice shook on the other end. Brother, something's happened. Kieran drove through the curtain of rain, his heart pounding like it wanted to burst through his ribs. When he arrived, Catherine's car was crushed and mangled, bullet holes scattered across the body like claw marks from a beast. And she was there, lying in the road, in a pool of blood spreading under the rain, her eyes still open, her mouth still moving. He lunged forward, dropped to his knees beside her, not caring that her blood was soaking into his clothes. Catherine, look at me. She tried to speak, her voice as weak as a passing wind. The kids, protect the kids. Then her eyes slid shut, and Kieran screamed into the rainy night, the sound tearing his throat open, tearing his soul open, tearing apart everything he had ever believed about this world. After that, there was blood, so much blood. Kieran couldn't remember clearly what he'd done for the next 3 weeks. He only remembered terrified faces, pleading voices, and the final silence. 47 people, the entire Petrov family, un by un. He didn't stop until only Alexei Petrov was left alive, running like a rat. But blood didn't fill the emptiness. Revenge didn't bring Catherine back, and when the fury finally settled, Kieran realized he was standing in the ruins of himself. His 3 children didn't laugh anymore. Connor stopped speaking. Finn stopped playing. Molly cried every night, asking when Mom was coming home. And he didn't know how to answer. He didn't know how to hold them without thinking of Catherine. He didn't know how to look into their eyes without seeing her looking back. The house became a graveyard, and Kieran became the ghost that lived inside it. Until today. He opened his eyes and looked down at the handwritten line in the file. I understand loss. I won't run from it. She'd seen the blood on his cuffs. She knew he was dangerous, but she'd still stood there, the children clinging to her the way they clung to a lifeline. She'd still stood there, looking straight into his eyes, not trembling, not judging. She'd still stood there. Who was Eliza Monroe? What had she lost that she could face a monster without blinking? Who was she that she could do what he couldn't? What all his money and power couldn't reach? She had brought laughter back to his children. In a single afternoon, by lying face down on the floor and pretending to be a horse, Kieran folded the file closed and set it on the desk. Outside the window, the sky was shifting from black to gray. Dawn was coming. He still hadn't slept, and he knew he wouldn't, because there was one question drilling deeper and deeper into his mind, refusing to let him go. Why hadn't she run? And why, when he thought of that question, did he feel something waking inside his chest? Something he'd believed had died with Catherine 10 months earlier. Hope. Kieran came down to the kitchen earlier than usual the next morning. He told himself it was because he had an important work call and needed to prepare ahead of time. But that was a lie. The truth was, he wanted to see her. Wanted to see her in daylight, when there was no blood on his cuffs, when there was no darkness to hide the questions in his eyes. Eliza was already there, standing at the stove with her back to the door. She was making pancakes, her movements gentle and unhurried, natural in a way that made it seem as if this kitchen had belonged to her for a long time. The scent of melting butter and browning batter drifted through the air, strangely warm. Kieran couldn't remember the last time this room had smelled like that. Maybe when Catherine was still alive. He stayed in the doorway, not stepping in, only watching. Eliza's brown hair was tied high, exposing the pale nape of her neck and her narrow shoulders. She wore a simple cream-colored shirt, no makeup, no jewelry except for a thin silver bracelet on her left wrist. She looked ordinary, too ordinary for someone who'd seen a traitor's blood and hadn't screamed. Then small footsteps pattered down the stairs. Connor, Finn, and Molly burst into the kitchen, faces still sleepy, eyes bright the moment they saw Eliza. Molly reached her first, wrapping her arms around Eliza's leg. Eliza, today can we play horse again? Eliza bent down, smoothed the little girl's hair, a soft smile on her mouth. After breakfast, princess. Right now you've got to eat. Finn shoved in next, tugging at Eliza's sleeve. I want a bear pancake. All right, a special bear for Finn. And then Connor, the oldest. The one who hadn't spoken for 10 months. The one the therapist said would need time and patience. Connor stood beside Eliza without saying anything. Just stood there. Then he whispered, his voice as small as wind. I like your pancakes. Kieran felt his chest tighten. That was the first time Connor had spoken to anyone other than Eliza since the night Catherine died. The first time in 10 months. And the boy said it simply, as if it wasn't anything extraordinary, as if Eliza had always been here. Eliza turned and saw Kieran in the doorway. The smile on her lips faltered, only for a heartbeat. Then she steadied herself. Her eyes flicked to his sleeves. Clean today, no blood. She didn't mention it. She only gave a small nod. Good morning, Mr. Blackwood. Kieran, he corrected, his voice lower than he meant it to be. Just call me Kieran. She nodded and turned back to the stove, pouring batter into the pan. The children climbed onto their chairs around the table, laughter and chatter filling the room. Kieran walked in and sat at the far end of the table, watching. He felt like an outsider in his own house. Eliza brought plates of pancakes to the children. A bear for Finn, a flower for Molly, and a plain one, larger than the others, for Connor. She poured orange juice, cut Molly's pancake into small pieces, wiped Finn's hands when he spilled milk. Everything about it was effortless, smooth, as if she'd done this her entire life. Then she came to Kieran and set a cup of coffee in front of him. Black, no sugar, she said quietly. Mrs. Maggie said that's how you like it. He looked up, and their eyes met. She didn't look away. She didn't lower her head. She wasn't afraid. She just stood there, waiting. You, Kieran began, then stopped. He didn't know what to say. Eliza set the coffee pot down and faced him, her voice dropping so the children wouldn't hear. I saw the blood yesterday. Kieran went still. He'd been waiting for this. Waiting for the question, the judgment, the moment she said she was quitting. But Eliza didn't ask where it came from. She didn't ask what he'd done. She only said, her tone strangely calm, I don't know what you do. I won't ask. That isn't my business. He stared at her, waiting. But I need to know one thing, Eliza continued, her eyes fixed on his. Are the children safe? Such a simple question. Not are you a bad man. Not do you kill people. Only are the children safe. Kieran looked at her for a long time. Then he said it, his voice firm as an oath. I'll die before I let anyone touch them. Eliza nodded slowly, as if that was all she needed to hear. She didn't ask anything else. She didn't judge. She didn't run. She simply turned back to the stove and went on with her work, as if the conversation had been about the weather. Kieran sat there, the hot coffee warming his hands, watching her move around the kitchen, watching the children laugh with her. She knew he was dangerous. She knew something dark was happening, but she was still here. For the children, or for something else. He didn't know. But for the first time in 10 months, Kieran Blackwood felt something beginning to melt inside the frozen cage of his chest. Something warm, something he'd thought had died with his wife on that rainy night, and that frightened him more than any enemy ever could. 3 weeks after that morning, things began to change. Not in big, noisy ways, but in small, quiet ones. The way water wears stone down over time. Kieran Blackwood, the most notorious mafia boss in Chicago, the man the entire underworld bowed to, started coming home earlier. At first he told himself it was because work hadn't been too demanding lately. A lie. Then he told himself it was because he wanted to check the mansion's security. Another lie. The truth was, he wanted to hear his children's laughter. The truth was, he wanted to see her. Every afternoon, Kieran stood at an upstairs window where he could look down into the garden without anyone seeing him. Eliza usually took the children outside at that hour, when the late sun softened and the air cooled. She sat beneath the old oak tree, and Connor, Finn, and Molly gathered around her like chicks around their mother. She read to them, her low, warm voice carrying all the way up to the window where Kieran stood. She spoke of faraway kingdoms, brave knights, princesses waiting to be rescued, and the children listened, eyes wide, mouths slightly open, as if the world inside her stories were more real than this one. Connor began to speak more. Not to Kieran, not yet, but to Eliza. The boy asked her everything. Why is the sky blue? Why can birds fly? Why doesn't Mom come back? Kieran didn't know how Eliza answered that last question. He only saw her pull the boy into her arms, stroke his hair, and Connor didn't cry. He simply sat in her embrace as if it were the safest place in the world. Finn began to laugh again. The little boy grew mischievous, always running, always in motion, and Eliza never scolded him. She chased him, pretended to be a monster, growling as she hunted him down, and Finn laughed so hard he toppled into the grass. The sound filled the garden, slipped through the windows, and touched Kieran's heart like warm fingers. Molly, the youngest, began to sleep better. She didn't cry in the middle of the night anymore. She didn't ask when Mom was coming home anymore. Every afternoon, after playing herself tired, Molly would drift to sleep on Eliza's shoulder, her tiny fingers gripping Eliza's shirt, and Eliza carried her away, gentle as if she were carrying a dream. The house was still full of Catherine's traces. Her paintings hung on the walls, colorful abstract oils. Her favorite coffee mug still sat in the cabinet, untouched, as if no one dared wash it. The book she'd been reading lay open beside the bed, a page marked midway through. Kieran couldn't change any of it. He was afraid that if he touched those things, Catherine would disappear completely. So he slept on the office sofa every night, never stepping into the master bedroom, never looking at the pillow that still held the hollow of his wife's head. Then one night, Kieran couldn't sleep. He wandered through the mansion like a ghost, passing dark hallways, silent rooms. When he walked past the library, he saw light spilling through the crack beneath the door. He stopped and pushed it open. Eliza sat curled on the leather sofa in the corner, bare feet tucked up on the cushion, a book open on her lap. She wore a white nightshirt, her hair loose over her shoulders, the warm lamp casting gentle shadows across her face. She looked peaceful, as if the darkness of this house couldn't reach her. She lifted her head at the sound of the door. No flinch, no panic, only a calm look. Can't sleep either? Kieran stepped inside and stood by the window. On nights like this, I usually wander. Me too, Eliza said softly. On nights like this, books are the best company. He glanced at the book in her hands. What are you reading? Wuthering Heights. Heavy book for a late night. Heavy thoughts need heavy books, she answered simply. Kieran didn't know when he decided it, but he sat down in the chair across from her, not too close, not too far, just far enough that they could speak without raising their voices. The silence between them didn't feel heavy the way silence did in other parts of the house. It simply existed, gentle, easy. They laughed, Kieran heard himself say, his voice roughening. I haven't heard that sound since. He couldn't finish the sentence, but Eliza understood. Since Catherine, she said softly. Hearing his wife's name from her mouth felt like a blow to Kieran's chest. Most people avoided saying Catherine, as if her name were a curse, as if speaking it would make him shatter. But Eliza didn't avoid it. She looked straight into his eyes, unblinking, unafraid. The children tell me about her, Eliza said. They say she sang the wrong lyrics in the car. She let them eat ice cream before dinner. She smelled like jasmine. Tears burned behind Kieran's eyes. Those small details, those ordinary scraps of life, he'd forgotten them. He remembered the rainy night, the spreading blood, the sound of his own screaming, but he'd forgotten that Catherine sang the wrong lyrics. He'd forgotten that she smelled like jasmine. Thank you, he whispered, his voice breaking, for remembering her through the children. Eliza closed the book and stood. She didn't say anything else. She didn't comfort him. She didn't soothe him. She only gave a small nod, as if she understood that sometimes silence was enough. Good night, Kieran. She left, her footsteps so light they seemed not to touch the floor. Kieran stayed behind, alone in the library, the book she'd left behind still warm from her hands. He didn't read. He simply sat there under the soft yellow light, and for the first time in 10 months, he felt a little less alone. She wasn't only bringing laughter back to his children, she was bringing something back to him too, and Kieran didn't know whether he should feel grateful or afraid of that. 3 weeks after that night in the library, Kieran had grown used to looking for Eliza every time he came home. Not to talk, not exactly, but simply to know she was there, to hear her voice drifting from the playroom, to see her silhouette moving softly through the rooms, to feel her presence like a small flame inside this freezing house. He didn't know when that presence had become so important. That evening, Kieran came home later than usual. The meeting with the capos had run long, because there was news of a shipment being stopped at the docks. By the time he stepped into the mansion, the clock had struck 8. The children would be asleep by now. The house lay still in the dark, with only a small light spilling out from the kitchen. Kieran moved toward that glow, his footsteps quiet on the wooden floor. But as he neared the kitchen door, he stopped. There was crying, a small, muffled sob, restrained, as if the person crying was trying not to make a sound, the kind of crying people do only when they believe no one can hear them. He stood in the doorway and didn't enter. Eliza sat alone at the table with her back to him. Her shoulders trembled in waves, her head bowed. In her hand she held something small, silver catching the yellow light, the bracelet. She opened it the way someone opens a tiny box, and Kieran caught a glimpse of something inside. Maybe a photograph. She was crying. The strong, steady woman, the one who'd seen blood on his cuffs and hadn't run, was breaking apart in his kitchen. Kieran didn't know what he was supposed to do. Walk in, walk away, pretend he'd seen nothing. He was used to facing enemies, to giving orders that decided life and death. But he didn't know how to face a woman's tears when they came from real pain. Then Eliza seemed to sense someone there, She turned her head, and when she saw Kieran in the doorway, her eyes went wide. Fear flashed through her face, then shame, and she hurriedly wiped her cheeks, trying to pull herself back into the calm she always wore. "I'm sorry," Eliza stammered, hurriedly wiping her cheeks. "I didn't mean for you to see this. I'll go to my room." She turned to leave, but Kieran's gaze fell on the silver object trembling in her hand. "Wait," he said softly. "Eliza, who is in the photograph in your bracelet?" Kieran asked, his voice gentler than he intended. Eliza froze. Her fingers tightened around the silver bracelet, as if it were the most precious thing in the world. She didn't answer at once. Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling like a leaf in the wind. "My son's name was Theo." Son. Kieran felt as if someone had punched him in the chest. "She had a son. He died 2 years ago," Eliza went on, her eyes dropping to the bracelet in her hand. "A brain tumor. Only 4 years old." She opened the bracelet fully and showed him the tiny photograph inside. A little boy with brown hair, blue eyes like hers, grinning wide, holding a feather in his hand. That smile was bright, innocent, unaware of sickness, unaware of death waiting nearby. "We fought for a year," Eliza said, her voice sounding as if it came from far away. "Hospitals, chemo, surgery. I watched him fade, day by day. I watched him lose his hair, lose his strength, lose the light in his eyes. I watched him stop being a child and become a patient." Tears rolled down her cheeks, and she didn't wipe them away. "This bracelet is all I have left of him." Kieran didn't speak. He couldn't. Language wasn't enough for pain like this. "My husband blamed me," Eliza continued, bitterness cutting through her words. "Bradley. He said I should have noticed the symptoms sooner. I should have pushed the doctors harder, demanded more tests. I should have done something, anything, to save him." Under the table, Kieran's hand curled into a fist. He knew that kind of man. The kind who blamed someone else because he couldn't bear his own helplessness. "He didn't hit me with his hands," Eliza said, her voice like a blade. "He hit me with words. Every day. Told me I killed our son. Told me I was worthless. Told me no one would ever want me." She drew in a shaky breath. "When we divorced, he took everything. Theo's pictures, his toys, his clothes, the memories, all of it. He said I didn't deserve to keep them." Kieran felt anger boil up inside his chest. Bradley Monroe. He'd remember that name. He wouldn't forget it. "Why did you become a nanny?" Kieran asked, his voice rough. Eliza looked up, her eyes red but no longer spilling tears. "Because I don't know how to live in a world without children's laughter. After Theo died, the silence nearly killed me. I needed to hear kids laugh. It's the only thing that kept me awake, kept me here." She held his gaze, and Kieran saw not only pain there, but understanding. The understanding of someone who had lost everything and still forced herself to stand. "When I heard about your children," Eliza said softly, "about what they lost, I thought maybe I could help them in a way I couldn't help Theo." Her voice broke. "I'm not trying to replace their mother. I just want to be able to love someone again." Kieran didn't think. He reached across the table and laid his hand over hers. Her fingers were cold, trembling, small inside his rough palm. She didn't pull away. She only looked at him, tears shining on her cheeks. "You aren't only helping them heal," Kieran said, his voice low and steady. "You're healing yourself." Eliza didn't answer. She only nodded once, her fingers tightening softly around his, and they sat like that in the dim kitchen light, two broken people finding each other in the wreckage of their lives, needing no more words. They sat in silence for a long time after Eliza finished. The yellow kitchen light carved out a small circle of brightness inside the darkness that smothered the house, as if the two of them were sheltering on a tiny island in a black sea. Kieran's hand still rested over hers, warm and steady, and Eliza didn't pull away. She needed that contact, needed to know she wasn't alone inside this grief. Finally, Eliza broke the silence, her voice as soft as a whisper. "Does it ever get easier, living every day without the person you love?" Kieran didn't answer right away. He thought of Catherine, of the hollow she'd left behind, of the nights he lay alone on the office sofa staring at the ceiling, trying to remember the sound of her voice. Sometimes he was afraid he'd forget. Sometimes he was afraid he never would. "No," he said at last, his voice low and honest. "Losing the person you love never gets easier, but the pain changes. It becomes something you learn to carry, instead of something that crushes you every day." Eliza nodded slowly, as if his words touched something deep inside her. Kieran went on, his voice breaking in the places he tried to hide. "The night Catherine died, I held her in a pool of blood. The rain fell like the sky was crying, but I didn't see the rain. I only saw her eyes, trying to hold on to me, trying to say something." He paused, swallowed hard. The last words she said were, "Protect the kids. Not I love you. Not don't forget me. Just protect the kids." Eliza squeezed his hand gently. She didn't speak. She only listened. I failed, Kieran said, bitterness roughening his throat. I protected them from enemies outside. I killed 47 people to avenge my wife, but I didn't protect them from the pain. I watched them cry every night, and I didn't know what to do. I watched Connor stop speaking, Finn stop laughing, Molly ask when her mother was coming home, and I just stood there like I was useless. You didn't fail, Eliza said, her voice gentle but firm. You're still here. You're still trying. That isn't failure. You too, Kieran said, his eyes locking on hers. You lost your son, lost your husband, lost everything. You were blamed for something that wasn't your fault. You were stripped of every memory of the child you carried and gave birth to. But you're still here. You still love. You still open your heart to my children even though you know love can bring pain. Tears slid down Eliza's cheeks, and she didn't wipe them away. That's the only thing I know how to do, she whispered. Loving is the only thing I have left. Kieran looked at her, a woman so fragile and yet stronger than anyone he'd ever met. She'd walked through hell and still had the ability to love. She'd been destroyed by the man who should have protected her, and still, she could open herself again. In Kieran's world, a world soaked in betrayal and violence, that kind of thing was so rare it felt almost holy. Bradley Monroe. The name carved itself into Kieran's mind like a knife wound. The man who blamed her for their child's death. The man who used words like weapons to ruin her day after day. The man who took every memory of Theo and left her with nothing but a small silver bracelet. Kieran didn't say it out loud, but in his head a quiet promise took shape. Bradley Monroe would pay. Not today, not tomorrow, but one day. And when that day came, he would learn what real suffering was. Eliza closed the silver bracelet and pressed it to her chest, as if she were holding her own heart. Thank you, she said, her voice soft but sincere, for not turning away. For sitting here with me. Thank you, Kieran answered, his voice low and warm. For staying, for not running. They looked at each other beneath the gentle yellow light, and Kieran realized something had shifted between them. They weren't employer and hired help anymore. They weren't strangers living under the same roof. They were two broken people who had found each other in the wreckage. Two imperfect pieces that somehow, impossibly, fit. And that terrified Kieran, because he was starting to need her, not only for the children, for himself. And in his world, needing someone meant giving them the power to destroy you. But tonight, in that silent kitchen, with her hand still held in his, Kieran decided he was willing to accept that risk. 2 weeks after that night in the kitchen, Mother's Day arrived. Kieran woke with the familiar fear pressing down on his chest. Last year, Catherine had still been alive. The children had made cards with colored paper and crayons, crooked little drawings full of love. Catherine had cried when she received them, happy tears sliding down her cheeks, and she'd taped every single one to the refrigerator, saying they were the most beautiful works of art she'd ever seen. This year, the refrigerator was bare, and Catherine was lying beneath cold earth. Kieran had a simple plan for today. Take the children to the cemetery. Say a few words at Catherine's grave. Go home. Survive the day. That was all he could do. He went downstairs, bracing himself for a long, painful day. But as he passed the playroom, he heard laughter and the lively chatter of the children. He stopped at the doorway and looked in. Eliza was sitting on the floor with Connor, Finn, and Molly. Around them were colored paper, crayons, glue, and glitter scattered everywhere. They were making cards. Kieran felt a sharp ache in his heart. Eliza was helping the children make cards for Catherine. Of course, she understood what this day meant. He moved a little closer, watching in silence. Molly finished her first drawing and held it up, grinning wide. Done! Kieran looked at the picture. A stick figure with brown hair and a big smile, surrounded by scribbled red hearts. Underneath was a wobbly line written in pink crayon. For Eliza, I love you. Kieran's heart seemed to miss a beat. Connor held up his own card. I love Eliza, with 3 small stick figures holding hands with one larger one. Finn drew a woman lying face down with 3 children sitting on her back, and underneath he wrote, Eliza is our horse, not for Catherine. They were making cards for Eliza. Kieran stood frozen in the doorway, not knowing what he was supposed to feel. Pain that his children had forgotten their mother. Relief that they'd opened their hearts to someone. Guilt for feeling that relief. All of it twisted together into a knot in his chest, tightening until it was hard to breathe. Then Eliza looked up and saw him standing there. Her face went pale instantly. She sprang to her feet, flustered, her hands still smeared with glue and glitter. I didn't tell them to do that. I swear. I told them they should make cards for their mom. We did. Finn cut in, holding up another card Kieran hadn't seen at first. This one had angel wings and flowers drawn with more care. Beneath it was a line Connor had written, because his handwriting was the neatest. I miss Mom. Mom is in heaven. Kieran felt as if the air had been pulled from his lungs. They hadn't forgotten Catherine. They'd only made room for one more person. In their small hearts, there was space for both. Molly ran to him, tugged at his sleeve, and looked up with wide eyes. "Daddy, can Eliza come with us to visit Mom?" The simplicity of the question left Kieran wordless. He looked at Eliza. She was shaking her head, eyes reddened, hands waving it off. "No, I shouldn't. That's private. That's your family's thing. I'll stay home." "You are family," Connor said. 3 simple words. But it was the first time Connor had spoken a complete sentence to anyone other than Eliza since his mother died, and he said it while looking straight into Eliza's eyes, his voice steady as if it were the most obvious truth in the world. Kieran looked at his son, then at Eliza, then at Finn, and Molly. All 3 of them were watching her with hope, as if she were their son. "If you want to go," Kieran heard himself say, his voice turning rough, "you can come with us." An hour later, they stood in front of Catherine's grave. The late afternoon sun filtered through the trees, laying warm golden streaks across the green grass. A white marble headstone bore the name Kieran Blackwood, and beneath it the words, "Beloved wife, wonderful mother." The children placed both kinds of cards on the stone, the card for Mom in the middle, the cards for Eliza on either side, as if they wanted Catherine to see that someone was taking care of them. Then Eliza did something Kieran didn't expect. She knelt in front of the headstone, not caring that damp grass soaked into her knees. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she spoke, her voice trembling but sincere. "I hope you don't mind that I love them. I'm not trying to replace you. No one could ever replace you. She stopped, swallowed hard. "I just can't help it. They're so wonderful. And I'll protect them. I promise." Connor stepped up beside Eliza and set his small hand on her shoulder. Then he turned to the headstone and spoke to his mother for the first time since the funeral. "Mom, Eliza makes really good pancakes. She plays with me. She reads stories to me, and she doesn't get upset when I talk about you." That last sentence hit Kieran like a blade through the chest. "She doesn't get upset when I talk about you." He was the one who got upset. He was the one who retreated every time the children mentioned Catherine. He was the one who made his children afraid to speak about their mother. Eliza stood, wiped her tears, and turned back, and her eyes met Kieran's. Something passed between them in that moment, understanding, forgiveness, permission to keep living, and to keep loving. On the way home, Molly held Eliza's hand on one side, and Kieran's on the other. She walked between them, skipping, singing a nonsense song she'd made up herself. Finn and Connor trailed behind, arguing about what kind of pancake shape Eliza would make for each of them tomorrow morning. And Kieran realized that, for the first time in 10 months, they looked like a family. 2 months had passed since Mother's Day. 2 months of laughter, of warm breakfasts, of nights when Kieran no longer wandered the mansion alone. Everything was going well. Too well. And Kieran should have known that in his world, happiness never lasted. That afternoon, Kieran was in his office, reviewing financial reports from the underground casinos, when Declan walked in without knocking. His brother rarely did that. Declan was cautious, always maintaining a professional distance even with his own blood. For him to enter unannounced meant something serious had happened. Kieran looked up, saw Declan's face, and knew at once that something terrible was wrong. His brother looked like he'd seen a ghost, and in a way, he had. "Bad news, brother," Declan said, his voice tight. "Alexei Petrov is back in Chicago." The name hit Kieran like ice water to the face. Alexei Petrov, the only one who'd survived Kieran's slaughter. The man who'd ordered Catherine's death. The one Kieran had hunted for 10 months and never found. He'd run like a rat and vanished without a trace. And now he was back. "Where is he?" Kieran asked, his voice cold as steel. "We don't have an exact location yet. But it gets worse." Declan set a stack of photographs on the desk. "He knows about the nanny." Kieran picked the photos up, and the blood in his veins seemed to freeze. Pictures of Eliza taking the children to the park. Eliza sitting on a bench, Connor and Finn running in front of her, Molly in her lap, taken from far away, from the angle of someone watching, someone stalking prey. "He knows you care about her," Declan went on. "Someone in his organization has been watching the mansion. They've seen you coming home early every day. They've seen the way you look at her." Kieran clenched the photos so hard the paper crumpled in his grip. They'd been watching. They'd known, and he hadn't even realized it. "There's more," Declan said, handing him a sheet of paper. "A message from Petrov." Kieran unfolded it. The handwriting was rough, but the meaning was brutally clear. "You took everything from me. I'll take everything from you." Kieran's hand shook, not with fear, but with the rage boiling in his chest. Petrov wanted a war. He'd get a war. But this time, Kieran wouldn't let him escape. "Double security," Kieran ordered, his voice sharp as a blade. "No one leaves the mansion without guards. The kids don't go outside. And Eliza?" He stopped, swallowed hard. "Eliza gets protection 24/7. Does she know? About you? About what you do? She knows enough, Kieran said, setting the photos down. But she doesn't know about Petrov. Not yet. How long are you planning to hide it from her? Kieran didn't answer. He wanted to keep Eliza away from this dark world forever, if he could. He wanted her to know only the children's laughter, the warm mornings in the kitchen, the quiet nights in the library. He didn't want her to see the real monster he could become, but he knew that sooner or later the truth would surface. And when it did, she would run. Everyone ran when they finally saw the true darkness. Find Petrov, Kieran said, his voice an order that couldn't be refused. Find him before he touches my family. Declan lifted an eyebrow at the word family. He didn't say anything, but his eyes said everything. Kieran knew what his brother was thinking. Since when had the nanny become family? But Declan didn't ask. He only nodded and left. That night, Kieran stood outside the children's bedroom door and listened. Eliza was singing Molly to sleep, her voice light as wind, humming a little song she'd made up about stars and sweet dreams. Molly whispered something, and Eliza gave a quiet laugh, a sound like wind chimes in the still night. Kieran's fist tightened. Petrov wanted to take what he loved. He'd have to walk over Kieran's body first. He'd lost Catherine. He wouldn't lose anyone else. Even if he had to become a monster more terrifying than any darkness, he would protect them, the children, and Eliza, especially Eliza. 1 week after Declan brought the news about Petrov, Kieran was forced by Maggie to attend Chicago's annual upper-class charity gala. His mother-in-law sat on the organizing committee, and she wouldn't accept no for an answer. You can't hide forever, Kieran, she said over the phone, her voice stern but threaded with worry. People need to see you're still standing. Catherine wouldn't want you turning into a recluse. And because it was Maggie, the only woman left who still tethered him to Catherine, Kieran agreed. The gala was held at the Palmer House, inside a dazzling ballroom where crystal chandeliers rained light over marble floors. Familiar faces from Chicago's elite drifted through the room like peacocks, showing off jewelry and gowns that cost more than most people's yearly salaries. They smiled at Kieran as he passed. Polite smiles. Distant smiles. These were the people who'd sent flowers to Catherine's funeral, and then never called again. The people who avoided Catherine's name as if death were contagious. Kieran stood in a corner with a glass of champagne in his hand for appearance's sake, his eyes sweeping the crowd without truly seeing anyone. He was thinking about Eliza at home with the children, about her smile when Molly demanded another horse game, about the way she stroked Connor's hair when nightmares took him. He wanted to go home. He didn't belong here. Then a woman's voice sounded beside him, sweet as honey with something sharp hidden underneath. Kieran, darling, it's wonderful to see you out. Victoria Ashford. Kieran turned and found her in a dress the color of blood, a venomous smile on her painted lips. Victoria was the widow of Marcus Ashford, one of Chicago's wealthiest businessmen. Marcus had died in a boating accident 2 years earlier, but the whispers in high society said Victoria had arranged that accident to collect the inheritance. No one could prove it, but everyone knew, and Victoria didn't care. She'd set her sights on Kieran even before Catherine died. Now she didn't bother hiding it. Victoria, Kieran replied coolly. Lovely evening. Much lovelier with you here, Victoria said, stepping a little closer. I've heard the children are doing better. You found yourself some devoted help, didn't you? Kieran went alert at once. Victoria's tone wasn't casual. There was something under those fake compliments. She's a nanny, he said shortly. She's good at her job. Of course, Victoria gave a soft laugh, but it never reached her eyes. It's just that I happened to meet someone very interesting recently. He told me quite a few things about Miss Monroe. Kieran felt every muscle in his body tighten. She knew Eliza's name. She dug into her life. Victoria turned toward the crowd and lifted her hand in a lazy wave at a man standing near the bar. Bradley, darling, come over here. The man approached, and Kieran recognized him instantly even though they'd never met. Bradley Monroe, Eliza's ex-husband. The man who'd blamed her for Theo's death. The man who'd used words to break her day after day. The man Kieran had silently promised would pay. Bradley looked worse than Kieran had imagined. Rumpled clothes, eyes bloodshot from drinking, stubble that hadn't been shaved in days. But in those dull eyes there was still hatred, envy, and something even more poisonous. So you're the guy who stole my ex-wife, Bradley said, slurring with drink but still dripping with sarcasm. Kieran didn't answer. He only looked at him, eyes cold as ice. Has she told you about our son yet? Bradley went on, his voice rising enough to draw the attention of a few people nearby. About how she let him die? The champagne glass in Kieran's hand cracked under the pressure of his grip. Liquid ran over his fingers, but he didn't feel it. The only thing he felt was the fury boiling in his chest, demanding release. Get out of here, Kieran said through his teeth, his voice low and dangerous. Before I forget we're in public. Bradley laughed, the wild laugh of a man with nothing left to lose. Victoria paid me to come. You know that? She wanted you to know the truth. Eliza Monroe is a child killer. She was a nurse and she didn't even realize her own kid had a brain tumor. She let him die, and then played the victim. Declan appeared at Kieran's side as if from thin air, his hand settling on Kieran's shoulder like a reminder. Not here. Not now. Kieran knew his brother was right. Hitting a drunk man in the middle of a charity gala would only spark a scandal. And scandal was the last thing Kieran needed, with Petrov circling and searching for weakness. Kieran leaned toward Bradley, his voice a whisper meant only for them. You're going to pay for every word you just said. Not today. Not here. But soon. And when that day comes, you'll wish you'd never opened your mouth. Bradley went pale, the bravado of alcohol draining away as he looked into Kieran's eyes and saw the monster underneath. He stumbled back a step, nearly losing his balance. Victoria remained where she was, satisfaction curling at the corners of her mouth. I just wanted you to know who you're trusting, Kieran. Be careful what you love. It can disappear at any moment. And you should know who you're playing with, Victoria, Kieran replied, his gaze winter cold. People who play this game with me don't usually end well. He turned and walked out of the ballroom without looking back. Declan followed in silence. Outside, the night air cut like a blade against his skin, but Kieran didn't feel cold. He felt only rage boiling and worry twisting together inside his chest. Victoria had linked up with Bradley. Petrov was watching. Darkness was tightening from every direction, and Eliza was at home, unaware of any of it, singing Molly to sleep with a voice light as wind. Kieran had to protect her, at any cost. Kieran got back to the mansion after the gala with his mind spinning. The fury from the confrontation with Bradley was still boiling in his blood, but what worried him more was Eliza. Rumors moved fast among the help. If Bradley had shown up publicly like that, she would hear about it. He found Eliza in the kitchen, standing by the sink with her back to the door. She didn't turn when she heard his footsteps, but her shoulders were rigid, and Kieran knew she already knew. I heard Bradley was at the gala, Eliza said, her voice trembling slightly, though she tried to keep it steady. Mrs. Ashford's maid called Mrs. Maggie's housekeeper. News travels fast. Kieran stepped closer, but didn't touch her. He was drunk and running his mouth. You don't have to worry. Eliza turned, her eyes red as if she'd been crying, though there were no tears left now. What did he say? It doesn't matter, Kieran. Her voice sharpened. What did he say? Kieran was silent for a moment. Then he let out a breath. He said you killed your child. Eliza didn't react. She only stood there, staring at the floor, as if she'd heard that sentence too many times to feel it anymore. He'll never leave me alone, she said, tiredness weighing down every word. He'll destroy anything good I have. That's how he punishes me for daring to walk away. He won't touch you, Kieran said, his tone hard with certainty. I promise. Eliza looked up, her eyes full of exhaustion and resignation. You don't understand, Kieran. Bradley doesn't have to touch me. He just has to talk. And people will believe him. They always do. Right then, Kieran's phone buzzed. Declan, he answered, and his brother's voice was so tight Kieran felt his blood turn to ice. Someone broke into the guest house, where Eliza stays. They left a message. Kieran didn't say anything. He ended the call and ran. Eliza followed even though he told her to stay. She didn't listen. She never listened when he told her to do something for her own safety. The guest house sat at the far edge of the garden, where Eliza had lived since she came to work for the Blackwood family. When they reached it, the door was standing open. The inside had been torn apart, furniture overturned, the bed slashed open, clothes strewn across the floor. But what made Kieran go still wasn't the chaos. On the white wall across from the doorway, a sentence had been written in red paint like blood. I'll take everything. Petrov. Eliza stood beside Kieran, her eyes locked on the red words. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She only stood there, frozen, and whispered a question that squeezed Kieran's heart until it hurt to breathe. Who is Petrov? Kieran didn't answer right away. He'd known this moment would come, the moment the truth couldn't be hidden anymore. He just hadn't expected it to arrive like this, with fake blood on the wall and the sharp stink of paint in the air. The man who killed my wife, he said at last, his voice low and heavy, and now he's coming for you. Eliza turned to him, her eyes widening. Your wife was murdered? I heard from the staff she died in a car accident. That's what I told the world. The truth is, she was assassinated. Her car took more than 20 bullets on a rainy night. By who? Why? Silence. Kieran held her gaze, and he saw not only fear there, but resolve. She wouldn't accept half-truths. She needed all of it. By my enemy, he said, because of my work. What work, Kieran? Eliza's voice shook, but she didn't step back. I've seen blood on your sleeves. I knew you were dangerous, but I need to hear you say it. Who are you, really? Kieran looked at her for a long time. The woman in front of him, brown hair tousled, eyes red, but still unbroken, still not running. She'd seen the darkness around him and stayed anyway. She deserved the truth. I'm a mafia boss, Kieran said, his voice steady. The Blackwood family controls half of Chicago. The port, the underground casinos, the money laundering network. It's the empire my father left me, and I've kept it with blood. Eliza didn't speak. She just stared at him, her expression unreadable. Catherine died because of me, Kieran went on, his words cutting into himself. Because of my work. And Petrov, the man who wrote that message on the wall, is the one who ordered her death. He wants revenge because I wiped out his family. 47 people. I killed them after Catherine died. The silence stretched. Kieran waited. For her to scream. For her to run. For her to look at him with disgust, the way others would once they knew the truth. But Eliza did none of those things. She only looked at him, and at last she asked a question Kieran couldn't believe he was hearing. Who are you really? Kieran Blackwood? A monster? Or a man trying to protect what he loves? Kieran had no answer. He didn't know who he was anymore, but the way she looked at him, not judging, not afraid, only full of questions and something that felt like understanding, made him want to become the man she believed he could be. I need time to think, Eliza said finally, her voice weary but no longer shaking. But I won't run. Not yet. They left the guest house in silence, crossing the pitch-dark garden toward the main mansion. Declan had already sent people to clean up and tighten security, but Kieran knew it wasn't enough. Petrov had gotten all the way in here, had left a message inside Kieran's own home. That meant there was a traitor in the organization, or there was a serious hole in his security. Either way, it had to be dealt with. But not tonight. Tonight, he had something more important. Kieran led Eliza into the mansion's living room, where warm yellow light fell across Catherine's paintings on the walls. The children had been asleep for hours, the house silent except for the steady ticking of the clock on the mantel. He sat in the chair across from Eliza, met her gaze as she looked at him, and waited. I need to know everything, Eliza said at last, her voice calm in a way that was almost unsettling. Not half-truths, not a prettied-up version. Everything. Kieran nodded. She deserved the truth, even if the truth made her run forever. The Blackwood family controls half of Chicago, he began, his voice low and even, as if he were reading the sentence of his own life. The port, the underground casinos, a money laundering network through shell companies. It's the empire my father built when I was still a kid. He taught me that in this world, you're either the man holding the gun or the man getting shot. There isn't a third option. Eliza didn't speak. She only listened. When my father died, I inherited all of it. I was 25, young and stupid, thinking I could change everything, thinking I could wash dirty money clean and turn it legitimate. But the underworld doesn't allow that. When you try to step back, they drag you in again. With blood. Did Catherine know? Eliza asked. Catherine knew everything, Kieran answered, bitterness flooding his words. She knew who I was before we ever married. She said she loved me, not my work. She said she'd stay with me no matter what, and I believed her. He paused, swallowing hard. But I didn't protect her. Tell me about that night, Eliza said gently. Kieran closed his eyes and the memories crashed in like a black wave. The Petrov family wanted to expand territory. They demanded a piece of our port. I refused. Alexei Petrov said he'd teach me a lesson about the price of arrogance. His voice shook. That night, Molly had a fever. Catherine went out to buy medicine. I was in a meeting and I didn't go with her. I thought it was just the pharmacy down the street. What could happen? You couldn't have known, Eliza said. I should have known, Kieran said, bitterness cutting deep. That's my job, knowing every danger before it comes. But I got careless. And when the phone rang, when Declan said something's happened, I knew I'd lost her. He opened his eyes and looked straight into Eliza's. Catherine's car took more than 20 bullets. She died in my arms, in a pool of blood, in the rain. Her last words were, protect the kids. Tears slid down Eliza's cheeks, but she didn't turn away. After that, I lost control, Kieran continued, his voice turning ice cold, though it trembled where he tried to hide it. I hunted the Petrov family down. One by one. 47 men. I killed them with my own hands, or I ordered my men to kill them. I didn't stop until only Alexei was left alive. Running like a rat, Eliza drew in a sharp breath. Kieran could see her trying to take in what he'd said. 47. Not one. Not two. 47. My hands are covered in blood. Eliza, Kieran said, his words slicing into himself. I'm a monster. I've killed people, and I'll keep killing if I have to. That's who I am. That's my world. Silence stretched out. Kieran waited. For her to stand up and walk out the door. For her to say she couldn't stay with a murderer. For her to look at him with the disgust he deserved. But Eliza did none of that. She sat still for a long time, eyes lowered to her own hands twisted together in her lap. Then she asked, her voice as light as breath. Have you ever hurt someone innocent? No, Kieran answered immediately. Only people in the game. People who know the risk when they step into that world. Women? Children? Never. Eliza lifted her head, her eyes meeting his, and what Kieran saw there wasn't disgust. It wasn't fear. It was something else. Something that looked like understanding. "I'm not afraid of monsters, Kieran," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I'm afraid of people who wear good masks." Bradley wore a perfect mask for years. Successful lawyer, model husband, wonderful father. And he destroyed me from the inside where no one could see. She paused, drew a deep breath. "You don't wear a mask. You're showing me exactly who you are. The darkness, the blood, all of it. It's the only honesty I've known in a long time." Kieran stared at her, as if he couldn't trust his own ears. "Did you hear what I said? I killed 47 people. I heard you," Eliza said. "You're a killer. You're dangerous. And you'll protect the children at any cost." She held his gaze without blinking. "That's all I need to know. You'll stay?" Kieran asked, his voice rough with disbelief. "I'll stay," Eliza said. "But I need you to promise me one thing." "What?" "Protect the children. No matter what happens to me, protect them." Kieran stood, moved in front of her, and dropped to one knee so their eyes were level. "Nothing is going to happen to you," he said, his voice an oath. "I promise. You're family. You've been family since the day my son laughed again." Eliza reached up and touched his face, her fingers warm against his skin. "Then end this," she said. "End Petrov, so we can live." Kieran nodded, and in that moment, he knew he would burn the whole world down to protect this woman. 1 week after the night Eliza learned the truth, Kieran began his counterattack. He wasn't prey being stalked anymore. He was the hunter. And anyone who dared threaten his family was going to learn the most expensive lesson of their lives. Victoria Ashford was the first target. Kieran met with Declan in the office, maps and documents spread across the desk like a miniature battlefield. "Victoria wants a war?" he said, his voice cold as steel. "We'll give her a war, but not with guns, with the thing she's afraid of most." "What's that?" Declan asked. "The truth." Kieran ordered an investigation into Victoria Ashford from the inside out. Every financial transaction, every phone call, every person she'd met over the last 2 years. He hired the best private investigators in Chicago, the kind who didn't ask why and only cared about money. The results came back within 4 days, and they were worse than Kieran had imagined. Marcus Ashford hadn't died in a yacht accident. He'd been poisoned. Victoria had swapped her husband's heart medication for counterfeit pills for 3 months before he died. When Marcus stepped onto that yacht with a heart so weakened it couldn't withstand the motion sickness, Victoria stayed home with a perfect alibi, waiting for the phone call that would tell her her husband was gone. She'd planned everything from the beginning. The fake prescriptions had been bought through a corrupt pharmacist who'd since been fired. Victoria's former housekeeper had seen her switching the pills and had been threatened into silence, but money could loosen anyone's mouth, and Kieran had plenty of it. He sent all the evidence to the Chicago police through an anonymous address. Another copy went to the Chicago Tribune. 48 hours later, Victoria Ashford was arrested in front of television cameras, wearing an expensive designer dress with her hands cuffed behind her back. She screamed Kieran's name, shrieked that he'd set her up, but nobody believed a woman accused of killing her husband for inheritance money. Her screams echoed from the television, and Kieran watched with a glass of whiskey in his hand, not a shred of regret. One enemy had been removed, one remained. Bradley Monroe was found in a cheap bar on the south side, where he'd been hiding ever since the gala. Without Victoria paying him, he didn't have the money to stay in any luxury hotel. He was drunk out of his mind when 2 of Kieran's men walked in, grabbed him by the collar, and dragged him outside like a bag of trash. An abandoned warehouse in the industrial district on the south side of Chicago. Weak yellow light fell over concrete walls stained with damp patches. Bradley was thrown onto the cold cement floor, clothes rumpled, eyes glazed with alcohol, but he started sobering up the moment he realized where he was and who he was with. Kieran walked in, his shadow stretching long across the floor. He wasn't wearing a suit like he had at the gala. He wore a black shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and there was nothing of the polished businessman about him. He looked like what he really was. Dangerous. A predator. "Do you know who I am?" Kieran asked, his voice calm in a way that was terrifying. Bradley swallowed, his eyes darting around the room for an exit, but there wasn't one. Mafia. Blackwood. "Good. Then you know what I can do." Bradley trembled, trying to back away, but the wall blocked him. "Please. I only did what Victoria told me. She paid me to come to the gala. I didn't want trouble." "You didn't want trouble?" Kieran cut in, stepping closer. "You stood in front of me and called Eliza a child killer. You did it in front of hundreds of people. And you're telling me you didn't want trouble?" Kieran didn't touch Bradley. He didn't need to. The fear in Bradley's eyes was enough. He simply stood there, looking down at the pathetic man at his feet, and spoke in a voice cold as ice. "You blamed her for your son's death. You beat her with words every day, until she believed she was worthless, until she believed she was a murderer. You took everything she had, His photos, his toys, his memories, and you threw her out into the street like trash. Kieran leaned down, his eyes like two black pits. You think you can do those things and not pay for them? I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Bradley sobbed, tears and snot soaking his face. I'll never bother her again. I swear. Your oath isn't worth a cent, Kieran said flatly. He straightened and looked down at Bradley the way he'd look at a worm. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to disappear from Chicago. You're never going to show up within 100 miles of Eliza Monroe. You're not going to speak about her to anyone. You're going to forget she exists. Yes, I will. Anything you want. If I hear your name again, Kieran continued, his voice like a blade, I won't kill you. Death's too easy. I'll make you wish you were dead. Do you understand? Bradley nodded frantically, his whole body shaking like a leaf in a storm. Get him out of the city, Kieran told his men. If he comes back, you know what to do. Bradley Monroe disappeared from Chicago that night. No one heard from him again. Some people said he moved to a small town in Texas. Some people said he changed his name and lived like a homeless man. Kieran didn't care. As long as Bradley stayed away from Eliza, he could live. That was the only mercy Kieran had to give. Kieran returned to the mansion at dawn, the sky shifting from black to gray. Eliza was waiting by the door, awake, not asking what he'd done. She only looked at him, her eyes filled with something Kieran couldn't read. Then she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him without a single word. Kieran stood there in her embrace, feeling her warmth seep through his cold shirt, and he realized that for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was doing the right thing. 3 days after the night Kieran dealt with Bradley, everything returned to normal in a strangely unsettling way. Victoria was in jail awaiting trial. Bradley had vanished. Only Petrov remained, but he was silent like a ghost. And that silence worried Kieran more than any threat ever could. Because when an enemy goes quiet, it means they're preparing. That afternoon looked ordinary, like so many afternoons before it. Soft golden sunlight filtered through the trees. A cool breeze rolled in from Lake Michigan, carrying the scent of grass and flowers. Eliza took the children out into the garden as usual. Even though Kieran had doubled security, 2 guards stood watch at the gate. 2 more patrolled the garden perimeter. But Eliza still wanted the children to have a normal life. Still wanted them running under the sun instead of being shut inside like prisoners. Connor sat on the stone bench beside Eliza, learning to read from a comic book she'd brought out. Finn and Molly chased butterflies across the lawn, their laughter ringing through the garden like bells. Eliza smiled as she watched them, sunlight catching in her brown hair and turning it into a gentle halo. Kieran was inside, on a call with Declan about the hunt for Petrov. We still can't find him, Declan said, his voice tight with frustration. It's like he evaporated. There's no trace. Kieran stood by the window, looking down at the garden where Eliza and the children were playing. Unease crawled along the back of his neck, that prickling sense of being watched. Keep searching, he told Declan. He can't hide forever. And then gunfire cut straight through his words. Bang, bang, bang. Kieran dropped the phone, the blood in his veins turning to ice for one horrifying beat, and then he exploded into motion, sprinting out of the room, taking the stairs 3 steps at a time, his heart slamming wildly in his chest. No, not again. Please don't. The children's screams hit his ears like knives. A guard's voice roared. Down, down. The shots kept coming, rapid and relentless, like fireworks from hell. Kieran yanked the gun from the drawer in the hallway desk and charged out the back door. The garden, peaceful and filled with laughter just minutes earlier, had become a battlefield. One guard was down, blood spreading red across the green grass. The other guard was firing back toward the fence, where shadows moved. But Kieran didn't see any of that. His eyes hunted for one thing. Eliza. She was lying face down on the lawn, her body pressed over 3 children curled beneath her. She'd used herself as a shield. Connor was sobbing, Finn was screaming, Molly was shaking, but Eliza didn't move, and there was blood on her shoulder, dark and blooming across her white shirt. Eliza. Kieran didn't know how loud he screamed her name. He threw himself toward them, slipped on the wet grass, his knees slamming into the ground hard enough to sting, but he felt nothing. He saw only Eliza, only blood, only the nightmare repeating itself. He rolled her over, his hands shaking as he touched her shoulder. Her face was pale, her eyes squeezed shut, but she was breathing. She was still breathing. Eliza, open your eyes. Look at me. Her lashes fluttered, her gaze dull with pain, and her lips moved, and the first thing she said wasn't about herself. The children. Are the children okay? Kieran looked down at the 3 little ones clinging to Eliza, their faces soaked with tears but streaked with no blood. They weren't hurt. She'd covered them. They're okay, he choked out. You've been shot. You, and she whispered. Okay, as her eyes began to drift shut again. As long as they're okay. No, don't you sleep. Eliza, look at me. Blood soaked Kieran's hands as he tried to press against the wound in her shoulder. The blood was warm, sticky, and red, just like Catherine's blood on that rainy night. He was holding her in a pool of blood again, and panic clenched his chest so hard he couldn't breathe. No. No. Don't. You can't die. Do you hear me? You can't die. Declan came running, phone in his hand. The ambulance is on the way. Petrov, his men ran. We're chasing them. Find him, Kieran roared, his eyes gone wild. Find him and bring him to me. Connor crawled to Eliza's side, his small hand clutching hers. Eliza, don't die. Don't be like Mom. His voice shattered the air. The cry of a child who'd lost his mother once and couldn't survive losing anyone else. Molly and Finn clung to Eliza, sobbing, calling her name the way children call for their mother. And Kieran understood, in that hellish moment, that she truly had become their mother, in every way that mattered. Eliza opened her eyes one more time, searching for Kieran. She tried to speak, her voice thin as a passing wind. I love them. And then her eyes closed, and she went limp in his arms. The wail of an ambulance siren rose in the distance, closer and closer. Kieran lifted Eliza into his arms, blood soaking through his shirt, just like the night Catherine died. But this time, he wasn't going to lose anyone else. He'd lost Catherine because he hadn't protected her. He wasn't going to lose Eliza, and Petrov would die, not for revenge, not for business, but because he'd dared to touch the woman Kieran loved, by Kieran's own hand. The hospital corridor was blindingly white and brutally cold, the sharp stench of antiseptic hanging in the air. Kieran sat on a hard plastic chair, his eyes locked on the operating room doors where Eliza lay inside. Her blood had dried on his hands, on his shirt, and he didn't bother to wipe it away. He couldn't move. He could only sit there and wait. The way he had waited the night Catherine died. The way he had waited in the hell of 10 months ago. The doctor had said the wound wasn't life-threatening. The bullet had passed through her shoulder, missed an artery, caused no internal damage, but those words did nothing to quiet the panic crushing Kieran's chest. He had seen her blood. He had held her in it. He had believed he was about to lose her. Maggie arrived with the children about an hour after Eliza was taken into surgery. She didn't ask questions. She only looked at Kieran with an expression full of worry and pain. She had lost her daughter to his world. Now the young woman she'd hired to care for her grandchildren had been shot because of him, and Kieran didn't know what he could possibly say to her. The children ran to him, their faces still marked with tears, their eyes red and frightened. Connor didn't say a word, just like 10 months ago, as if he'd retreated back into the shell Eliza had fought so hard to pull him out of. Finn cried without stopping, his choked sobs echoing in the quiet hallway. Molly clung to her stuffed bear, trembling like a leaf in a storm. Kieran dropped to his knees in front of them, searching for words that felt strong enough. Eliza will be okay, I promise. Connor lifted his eyes to Kieran, and the boy's gaze was empty, far away. Then he spoke, each word sounding as if it had to be dragged up from his throat. You said Mom would be okay too. The sentence went through Kieran like a knife. The boy remembered. He remembered that night, remembered the hollow promises, remembered the moment the world collapsed when his mother never came back, and now he was terrified history would repeat itself. Kieran didn't know what to say. He only pulled his son into his arms, felt the small body shaking against him. Finn and Molly pressed in as well, and they ended up sitting on the hospital floor, 4 bodies clinging to one another inside the same fear. 2 hours later, the doctor stepped out of the operating room. Kieran sprang to his feet, his heart pounding like it wanted to break his ribs from the inside. How is she? The surgery was successful, the doctor said, a tired smile on his lips. The bullet's been removed. She lost a fair amount of blood, but she's not in danger. She'll make a full recovery. Kieran felt his knees threaten to give. He had to brace himself against the wall to keep from collapsing. She would be okay. She would live. The doctor allowed them to visit once Eliza was moved to recovery. She lay on a stark white hospital bed, face pale, shoulder bandaged, but breathing, alive. The children rushed in the moment they saw her, climbing onto the bed and wrapping their arms around her, as if she might disappear if they let go. Don't die, Molly whispered, her cheek pressed to Eliza's uninjured arm. Don't be like Mom. Tears spilled from Eliza's eyes, but she smiled, a weak smile, tender and full of love. I'm not going anywhere, sweetheart. I promise. Then her gaze slid to Kieran standing in the doorway, searching for him. I'm okay, she said, her voice hoarse from anesthesia. It's just a scratch. You used your body to shield the kids, Kieran said as he moved to the bedside. You got shot protecting them. It was instinct, Eliza answered, her eyes holding his. I'd do it again 1,000 times if I had to. Later, the children fell asleep on Eliza's bed, exhausted from crying and terror. Kieran sat beside her, holding her hand, his fingers laced through hers as if she might vanish the moment he let go. I'm sorry, he said, his voice thick. This is my fault. My world hurt you. You can't control your enemies. Eliza answered, her fingers squeezing his gently. You can only control how you respond. Kieran looked at her, a woman lying in a hospital bed with a bullet wound in her shoulder, still comforting him instead of blaming him, stronger than anyone he had ever met. Petrov is going to die, he said, and his voice didn't shake, didn't waver. It carried only a certainty, as cold as steel. By my own hand. And then what? Eliza asked. Then I'll do whatever it takes to keep you and the kids safe. Leave Chicago if we have to. Leave all of it if we have to. Eliza studied him for a long time, her eyes shining under the harsh hospital lights. I don't need you to leave everything, she said at last. I just need you to come back. Kieran bent down and kissed her forehead, his mouth lingering against her warm skin. I'll come back, I promise. He stood and stepped out into the hallway. Declan was waiting there, his eyes bright the instant he saw Kieran. We found him, Declan said. Petrov, we know where he is. Kieran nodded, his eyes turning to ice. Go. The abandoned warehouse in the industrial district on the south side of Chicago. Midnight. No streetlights, no passing cars. Only darkness and the metallic stink of rust rising from old shipping containers. This was where Petrov had chosen as his last den, the place he thought he could hide after the failed attack. He was wrong. Kieran arrived with Declan and their team, silent as ghosts in the night. Petrov's men were taken down before they could react, swift and clean, without a single gunshot. Kieran didn't want Petrov to know he was coming. He wanted to see the fear in his eyes when he realized it was over. The final room of the warehouse. The rusted metal door screeched when Kieran shoved it open. Inside, Alexei Petrov sat on an old wooden chair, hands bound behind his back, his face swollen from a few punches Kieran's men had landed when they caught him. Dried blood cracked at his lips, but arrogance still flickered in his eyes when he saw Kieran step in. Blackwood, Petrov said, his voice rough and dripping with mockery. You finally came. Kieran didn't answer. He simply stood there, looking at the man who'd killed his wife, the man who'd tried to kill the woman he loved, the man who'd threatened his children. Rage boiled in his chest, but he held it down. He hadn't come here to lose control. He'd come here to finish it. You think killing me will change anything? Petrov sneered, his laugh echoing in the empty room. There'll be someone else. There's always someone else. This world doesn't run out of people who want to watch you fall. Maybe, Kieran said, his voice cold as ice. But it won't be you. Petrov stared at him, and for the first time, the arrogance in his eyes dimmed. Just a fraction. Your wife died screaming your name. You know that? She begged to live for the kids. She said, please don't. I've got little children. And I still gave the order to shoot. Kieran's hand tightened around the gun, but he didn't lift it. Not yet. Petrov was trying to provoke him, trying to make him snap and do something reckless. Kieran didn't take the bait. You killed my wife, Kieran said, his tone as level as if he were talking about the weather. You tried to kill the woman I love. You threatened my children. The woman you love? Petrov laughed, a sound like a crow's call. You love the nanny? Interesting. So do you know she'll die because of you? Just like your wife did? Everyone who stands beside you will die. She didn't die, Kieran said, and for the first time something like satisfaction glinted in his eyes. She lived. Your bullet didn't kill her, and you'll never get another chance to try. Whatever confidence Petrov had left collapsed. He'd gambled everything on that attack, believing that if he killed Eliza, Kieran would break, would weaken, would become easy to destroy. But he'd failed, and now he had no cards left to play. You won't kill me, Petrov said, but his voice was shaking now, the old certainty gone. You need me. I know secrets. I know who in your organization betrayed you. I don't need to know, Kieran cut in. I'll find out, not from you. He raised the gun, the muzzle aimed straight at Petrov's forehead. Petrov looked into Kieran's eyes, and for the first time, real fear showed on his aged face. Send my regards to hell, Kieran said. 47 men are waiting for you there. A single shot cracked through the night. Alexei Petrov would never threaten anyone again. Kieran stepped out of the room, his face unreadable. Declan waited outside, his eyes searching Kieran's. It's done? Declan asked. It's done, Kieran said. Clean it up. Leave no trace. On the drive back to the hospital, Kieran stared out the car window, the city of Chicago stretching beneath the night lights. He'd just killed a man. Again. His hand still felt hot from the trigger, but this time there was no emptiness. No regret, only the strange calm of knowing his family was safe. He reached the hospital at dawn, when the sky was shifting from black to a bruised gray violet. Eliza was awake, the children still asleep curled beside her on the hospital bed. She looked up when he entered, her eyes searching his for something. It's done, Kieran said, sitting beside her bed. He'll never threaten you or the kids again. Eliza didn't ask for details. She didn't need them. She only nodded, a small, gentle motion, and held her hand out. Are you okay? She asked. Kieran took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. Warm, alive, real. "I'm okay now," he said. And for the first time in 10 months, he felt like the pain might truly end. 1 week later, Eliza was discharged and returned to the mansion. The wound in her shoulder was healing, the bandage smaller now, and she could move her arm even though the ache still lingered. But what surprised Kieran most was the way she walked back into the house, as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't been shot, as if she hadn't once lain in a pool of blood on the lawn. The children didn't leave her side for even a moment after she came home. Connor read to her, their roles completely reversed from those first days. He sat beside her bed, his voice steady as he read fairy tales line by line, as if the sound of his words could keep her anchored in this world. Finn ran back and forth, bringing water, bringing snacks, bringing anything he thought Eliza might need. Molly clung to her, carrying her stuffed bear and placing it into Eliza's arms, saying, "So Eliza can hug it, and it won't hurt as much." Kieran watched from the doorway, his chest warming in a way that felt almost strange. She'd been shot protecting his children, and now his children were caring for her as if she were their mother. In some way, she had earned that title long before the words were ever spoken. On Eliza's first night back, the children finally agreed to go to bed after she promised she'd still be there when they woke up. Kieran walked them to their rooms, tucked them in, kissed each one on the forehead, something he rarely did before. Then he returned to the living room, where Eliza sat on the sofa, her shoulder still wrapped, staring out the window where moonlight spilled in. He sat down beside her, not too close, not too far, close enough to feel her warmth, close enough to hear her breathing. "Does it hurt?" he asked. "My shoulder aches a little," Eliza answered, her eyes still on the window. "But I'm okay. The pain meds are still working." Silence settled between them for a while. Not an awkward silence, but the kind that comes when two people have survived too much together, when words don't have to fill every space. "Petrov is dead," Kieran said at last, his voice low and even. Eliza nodded and didn't ask for details. She didn't need to know how he'd done it. She only needed to know the threat was gone. "Are you okay with that?" Kieran asked, and there was worry in his voice that he couldn't quite hide. Eliza turned to him, her eyes clear under the moonlight. "You protected your family. I understand. Family." She said your family, not our family, as if she didn't include herself in it, and that small difference sent a sharp ache through Kieran's chest. "When I saw you lying there," he said, his voice roughening, "blood on your shoulder, your eyes shut, I thought I was going to lose you, like I lost Catherine." Eliza didn't speak, she only listened. "And I realized," Kieran continued, his eyes holding hers, "that I can't lose you. Not because of the kids, not because I need someone to take care of them." He stopped, swallowed hard. "Because of me, because I need you." Silence. Eliza looked at him, something shining in her eyes that Kieran didn't dare name. "I love you, Eliza," he said, and each word sounded like it broke open on the way out. "I don't know when it started. Maybe the night you told me about Theo. Maybe when you didn't run even after you saw blood on my sleeves. Maybe it happened a little at a time. Every day. When I watched you laugh with my children. When I heard you sing Molly to sleep. When I saw you reading in the library at midnight." He drew a slow breath. "But I love you, and I need you to know that, whether you feel it back or not." Tears slipped down Eliza's cheeks, but she smiled. A trembling smile. The smile of someone who'd waited for something she didn't dare hope for. "I love you too," she said, her voice thick. "I tried not to. I know your world is dangerous. I know loving you could kill me, literally." She gave a small laugh through her tears. "But I couldn't stop. You and the children became my home. The only place I've belonged since I lost Theo." Kieran lifted his hand and touched her face, his thumb wiping away the tears on her cheeks. Her skin was warm beneath his palm, soft and real, and he couldn't believe she was here, that she loved him, that she didn't run. "You're my miracle," he whispered. "You're the thing I don't deserve but somehow was given anyway." Eliza covered his hand with hers, her fingers threading through his. "We don't deserve most of what we're given," she said softly. "But maybe that's what love is. Not deserving. Being chosen." Kieran leaned in toward her, slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. But she didn't. She leaned toward him, her eyes closing, their mouths met. Gentle, careful, as if they were both afraid this was only a dream, and it would vanish if they moved too fast. The kiss tasted of tears, and the sweetness of hope. The kiss of two people who had lost everything and found each other in the wreckage. When they finally parted, forehead to forehead, breaths mingling, Eliza asked in a whisper, "So what now?" Kieran smiled. For the first time in a long time, a real smile. Now we live, together, and for the first time, the future didn't feel terrifying anymore. 6 months had passed since their first kiss in the living room, and life inside the Blackwood mansion had changed in ways Kieran never would have dared to imagine. The children began calling Eliza, Mama Eliza, their own private compromise between honoring their birth mother and loving the woman who'd saved their souls. Connor had fully recovered, laughing and talking like himself again. Back in school, even starting to play ball with friends. Finn was still as mischievous as any 5-year-old, and Molly no longer woke from nightmares every night. The house that had once been a cemetery was now filled with laughter, the thud of running feet, and the smell of pancakes every morning. Kieran came home in time for dinner every day, something he'd never managed before. The work still continued, the underworld still turned, but he'd learned how to balance. Declan handled most of the day-to-day operations, and Kieran stepped in only when it truly mattered. He wasn't a man living for work anymore. He was living for his family. But Kieran had a secret. For 6 months, he'd been carrying out a plan no one knew about. Not even Eliza. Late-night calls with architects, discreet meetings with attorneys, trips to the east wing of the mansion, the wing that had been closed since Catherine died. Eliza had sensed something. She'd seen him slipping away, but she hadn't asked. She trusted him, and tonight, he was going to show her why. Kieran led Eliza through the garden just after sunset, the last light painting the trees in gold. The children were asleep. Maggie was watching them, and for once they had time to themselves. Eliza held his hand, her fingers woven through his the way they'd become used to. "Where are you taking me?" she asked, curiosity soft in her voice. "You'll see." They reached the east wing of the mansion, the place that had once been Catherine's studio, the place Kieran had sealed shut and refused to enter for 16 months. Kieran opened the oak door, and warm, bright light spilled out. Eliza stepped inside and stopped dead. The room had been transformed. It was no longer a dark, dusty studio. Now it was a bright space with white walls covered in blueprints and architectural renderings. Official documents stamped and sealed lay spread across the long table at the center. And on the largest wall, a sign in bold letters read, "The Theo and Catherine Foundation." Eliza lifted a hand to cover her mouth, and tears overflowed immediately. "You..." She couldn't finish, her voice breaking. Kieran stepped in beside her, his hand settling gently at the small of her back. "The Theo and Catherine Foundation," he said, his voice low and steady. "A support center for families with a child who has cancer, medical assistance, grief counseling, play therapy, a place where families can stay together through the hardest days, not alone." Tears poured down Eliza's cheeks like rain. Her son's name, Catherine's name. Together on one sign, together in one purpose. "You built this?" she whispered, her eyes locked on the words. "We built it," Kieran answered. "I couldn't do it without you. You know what these families need. You've lived it. This is your mission, but it doesn't have to take you far away. It can happen here, with us." Eliza turned to him, her eyes full of tears and full of something else, too. Love, gratitude, hope. Kieran handed her an envelope. "There's more." Eliza opened it with trembling hands. Inside were legal documents, official papers with seals and signatures. She read, and her eyes widened with every line. Co-director of the foundation, equal partner, and beneath that, another set of papers. Guardianship documents. "If anything happens to me," Kieran said, his voice serious and sincere, "you're the children's legal guardian. Connor, Finn, Molly, you've been their mother in every way that matters. This just makes it official." Eliza couldn't speak. She stood there with the papers in her hands, tears streaming like a spring. She'd lost her son, lost every memory she'd been allowed to keep, had her motherhood taken from her in the cruelest way. And now this man was giving her not only 3 children to love, but the official recognition that she was their mother, in the eyes of the law, in the eyes of the world. "Why?" she whispered, her voice splitting. "Why are you doing all this for me?" Kieran lifted his hand and wiped the tears from her cheeks. "Because you're not only important to the children, you're important to me. You're the one who saved us when I couldn't. You're the one who brought laughter back into this house. You're the one who loved my children when I was in too much pain to do it." He paused and drew a slow breath. "And I want to turn our pain into something beautiful. So Theo and Catherine didn't die for nothing. So their story, and our story, can help other people who are suffering the way we once suffered." Eliza threw her arms around him, crying into his shoulder, her body shaking with every sob. Kieran held her tight, one hand stroking her hair, letting her cry until there were no tears left. "Thank you," she whispered once she'd calmed, her face still pressed to his chest. "Thank you for not letting me forget my son. Thank you for giving me a family. Thank you for loving me." Kieran kissed the top of her head, his lips lingering in her soft brown hair. "You'll never forget Theo," he said, "and the world won't either. This foundation will make sure of it." They stood in the room blazing with light, surrounded by blueprints and dreams. 2 people who had once been broken finding a way to fit their jagged pieces together. Not perfect, but whole. 1 month after the night Kieran revealed the charity foundation. The opening ceremony for the Theo and Catherine Foundation was held in the east wing of the Blackwood mansion. What had once been a sealed, dust-covered studio had become the first care center, with bright rooms, a children's play area, counseling rooms for parents, and a small garden where families could sit together through their hardest days. Donors, reporters, and the first family to receive support were all there, gathered in a hall decorated with white flowers and photographs of Theo and Catherine. The children wore their best clothes, Connor in a tiny suit that made him look just like his father, Finn with a blue bow tie he'd chosen himself, and Molly in a white dress like a princess. Eliza stood beside them, her shoulder fully healed now, leaving only a small scar as a reminder of the day she nearly lost everything. She wore a soft cream dress, her hair down, and on her left wrist was still the silver bracelet engraved with Theo's name, the only keepsake of her son, now turned into a symbol of hope instead of pain. Kieran stepped up to the podium, the prepared speech tucked inside his suit pocket, but he didn't pull it out. He looked over the crowd, then toward Eliza and the children standing in the front row, and he knew he didn't need anything scripted. He needed to speak from the heart. "I used to think power could fix everything," Kieran began, his voice carrying through the silent room. "I had money, influence, everything the world says a man needs, but I was wrong. When my wife, Catherine, died, I learned there are things money can't buy, and power can't change. Grief, loss, the hollow space a person leaves behind when they're gone." He paused, his gaze searching until it found Eliza. "I failed at surviving. My children cried every night, and I didn't know how to comfort them. My oldest stopped speaking for 10 months. My home became a graveyard, and I became a ghost, living inside it." Kieran drew a deep breath, until someone showed up. His eyes locked on Eliza's. "That person taught me healing doesn't come from fixing what's broken. It comes from presence, from staying, from loving people in their mess, not waiting until they're perfect." His voice trembled slightly. "This foundation exists because of 2 people, my wife Catherine, who taught me how to love completely, and Eliza Monroe, who taught me how to love again." The crowd murmured, but Kieran didn't care. He lifted a hand toward Eliza. "Come up here." Eliza shook her head, her eyes shining with tears, but the children wouldn't let her refuse. Connor took one of her hands, Finn took the other, and Molly pushed from behind. "Come on, Mama Eliza. Papa called you." Eliza stepped onto the stage, her hand trembling when Kieran took it. He turned her toward the crowd, his eyes bright with pride. "This is Eliza Monroe, co-director of the foundation, the legal guardian of my children." He paused, then added, his voice softening, "And the woman I love." The children couldn't wait another second. Connor, Finn, and Molly rushed onto the stage and wrapped their arms around Eliza and Kieran. "Mama Eliza. Papa." Their voices rang through the room, and the crowd applauded, many people wiping away tears. The ceremony ended as the sun began to set, turning the garden behind the mansion gold. The guests had gone, the reporters had left, and only the Blackwood family remained in the gentle light of dusk. The children chased each other across the lawn, their laughter floating through the cool air. Kieran and Eliza sat on the stone bench Catherine had once loved, their shoulders touching, their hands intertwined. "Thank you," Eliza said, her voice light as wind. "For giving me a family. You've given me more," Kieran answered, his eyes on the children laughing as they ran. "You gave me a reason to live." "What do you think Catherine would say about all of this?" Kieran was quiet for a moment, then he smiled. "I think she'd thank you, for loving the children when she couldn't, for loving me when I didn't deserve it." Molly ran up and grabbed both of their hands. "Papa, Mama Eliza, come play with us." Kieran stood and pulled Eliza with him, and just like that, the most feared mafia boss in Chicago was running across the grass, chased by 3 children and a brown-haired woman, and he was laughing, truly laughing. The sound rolled through the garden, mixing with the children's laughter and Eliza's, weaving itself into a small symphony of happiness. Love doesn't end when someone is gone, it just finds a new way to grow. Catherine taught Kieran how to love completely, Eliza taught him how to love again, and the children taught him that healing can happen, even when it feels impossible. For the first time in a long time, Kieran Blackwood wasn't just surviving, he was living. Kieran and Eliza's story is proof that after darkness there's always light, that even the deepest wounds can be healed with love and patience, that family isn't only the people you share blood with, but the people who choose to stay when life is at its hardest. No matter how far life pushes you toward the edge, there's always someone willing to take your hand and climb back up with you. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel, tap like, and share the video so we have the motivation to bring you more moving stories every day. How did this story make you feel? Did it make you think of someone in your life? Leave a comment below. We'd truly love to hear what's in your heart. Wishing every one of you watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peace in every single day. Thank you for listening, goodbye, and we'll see you in the next video.